There are many ancient legends related to the Dalek homeworld of Skaro. Some have been passed down the generations as hearsay and fairy tales, swapped in occasional trades between human colonists and Thal scavengers that exist on the fringes of the galaxy. Most humans in civilized space are aware of the Daleks, but few have any idea as to their origins. To most people living in human space, the Daleks are a species of intergalactic boogeymen, an ominous, unstoppable threat that looms in the vast emptiness of the universe, preying on outlying systems and waging huge, unfathomable wars with the other horrors that lurk in the far reaches of space. Cybermen, Sontarans, Myra, Quarks, or the Stenza. There were many tales passed around spaceports and outposts about the Daleks, most coming from half-crazed freighter captains or conspiracy theorists that were never taken seriously by anyone, save the most naive of young spacers. But the tales passed from Thals to humans, on the rare occasion traders from the two species met, those tales were taken a lot more seriously, especially after the outbreak of the Dalek Wars. Because although the stories that the Thals passed down were at this point as much a myth as the stories passed around by space pirates were, the fact that the Thals traced these tales to the early days of Skaro, to days before the Daleks had even evolved, gave them a special sense of reverence, making them more like modern legends than tall tales. The problem that human historians of this era had with cataloguing Dalek history was that so much of it was lost. Even the Thals, who had as a species survived the 1,000-year war and centuries later succeeded in fleeing Skaro to establish colonies elsewhere, even they had lost a significant chunk of their own history. Most accounts suggested that there were two races on Skaro in the lead up to the creation of the Daleks. Two races who had fought a 1,000-year war that ravaged the surface of the planet. Two species, the Khaleds, who would later go on to become the Daleks thanks to the maniacal scientist Davros, and the Thals. However, historical accounts taken from the early years of Davros' life seem to suggest that at least some Khaleds were aware of a potential third species that had at one point inhabited Skaro, a species referred to as Dals. Khaled scientists studying the archaeological remains of the Dal society came to believe that they had once been the sole bipedal species inhabiting Skaro, and that the Khaleds and the Thals had emerged as offshoots of this common ancestor. This research was subsequently suppressed by the Khaled authorities, and those responsible were likely executed for harbouring treasonous anti-war sentiment. Nonetheless, this theory did not die with its theorists, and it eventually made its way as gossip from the Khaled ranks to those of the Thals, before eventually being passed down through the years as Thal legend. Indeed, there were some aspects of truth to the legend, even if the details were corrupted over time. Some versions of the story suggest that the Dals existed concurrently with the Khaleds and Thals at the start of the war, but were obliterated in the early years of the conflict. Some versions downplay the existence of the Dals by suggesting that this was actually an alternate name for the Mutos, the cast-off dregs of Khaled and Thal society who were banished to the wastelands and banded together for survival. The Time Lords believed that a singular Skarosian species once existed, but that the Dals later became the Khaleds. Indeed, the word Dal in the old Khaled language was said to translate to warrior, or even god, which was used by Davros and his understudy Shan in the development of the Dalek idea. There is even some evidence to suggest that other humanoid species existed on Skaro before the 1,000-year war, such as the Tharons, that were also destroyed when Skaro's surface was ravaged. However, the most famous and arguably most controversial legend related to the Dals was the one given to us in the early Dalek chronicles. The idea that the Dals were the species that waged a neutronic war with the Thals, devastated Skaro, and ultimately became the Daleks. Indeed, early Thals who emerged in the centuries following the Dal-Thal War seemed to believe that the Dals became the Daleks, though at this point the word Dal could have been used by them to refer to Khaleds who had survived the scourging of their city and the rise of the Daleks, only to die out later. Nonetheless, there are extensive and detailed stories recounting the history of the Daleks as descendants of the Dals. Most incarnations of this version of the story concur that the Dals were initially at peace with the Thals until their leader Drenz was murdered by the warlord Zolfian, who used designs for war machines drawn up by the scientist Yarveling to order the construction of a new army. Zolfian directed neutron bombs against the Thals, but a meteorite strike on the war factories of Dalazar caused a cataclysm that destroyed both the Dal and Thal civilizations. Emerging from the rubble after 2 years hidden in a fallout shelter, Zolfian and Yarveling realised that they were the only two Dals left on the surface, and that the radiation had mutated the remnants of their race into monstrous creatures who used the Dalek war machines as transportation. The first of these Daleks to use the war machines declared itself Emperor, and forced Yarveling to manufacture more machines for its brethren. Soon after this, both Yarveling and Zolfian died of radiation sickness, but the Daleks remained. While this origin story appears to contradict the more commonly held assertion that the Daleks were created by Davros from the Khaled species, there is some evidence to suggest that both of these origin stories could each be true to some extent. Supporters of the Dal idea point to a later event in Dalek history, again documented in the Dalek chronicles, that tells of an instance in which 3 Dals were revived from suspended animation by the Daleks, and that despite being initially enamoured by their descendants, the Dals would later grow to resent them and ultimately plot their destruction, suggesting that there may be more truth to the Dal theory than most human historians realise. Others have attempted to rationalise both the Dal and Khaled theories of Dalek evolution by suggesting that the race of bipedal Daleks that we have come to know as Dals were in fact the mutated remains of the Khaled survivors of the Thal attack on their city, who were able to survive and thrive after the end of the war thanks to the Fourth Doctor sealing Davros' Daleks inside their bunker. This allowed the Dal civilization to grow and continue their war against the ailing Thals, before the accidental neutron bomb detonation wiped out all but 5 of the Dals, Zolfian, Yarveling, and the 3 held in suspended animation, and forced the Thals to flee to elsewhere on the planet. The Dals named themselves after their ancient forefathers, and were unaware of the existence of the prior Khaled civilization, instead believing themselves to be the forefathers of the Dalek race, a fact that the first emergent Dalek, considered by some historians to be the Dalek Prime, was willing to take advantage of. It has even been suggested that Yarveling's design for the Dalek war machine was taken from early schematics of Davros' Mark I or Mark II travel machines, created before the final form of the Dalek machine had been perfected. It could therefore be possible that both the legendary origin stories of the Daleks are in fact based on real events that have been twisted and reinterpreted by generations of Thal storytellers. What do you think of the legend of the Dals? Is it nothing more than Thal myth? Or is it possible that there are some aspects of truth to this tale? Was there some other reason why the origin of the Daleks was altered so radically, such as the Time War or another universe-altering event? Let me know in the comments below.
Don't forget to click below to subscribe to
Dalek Bumps.